The night was heavy with silence, but the silence broke the moment Ibrahim Traoré raised his hand and ordered the trucks to stop. Imagine this scene clearly, because what he was about to uncover would not only shake his own people, but it would also expose the hidden hands of those who had been bleeding Africa dry for decades. Before I tell you what was inside those trucks, let me remind you to subscribe right now, because what you are about to hear is not an ordinary story. It is a truth hidden behind walls of power. The engines roared like beasts, the drivers hesitated, but they knew they could not ignore him. Under the dim moonlight, a line of trucks stood trapped in his command, each one heavy, each one suspicious, each one carrying the weight of secrets that no one was meant to see. For years, cotton had been planted, harvested, and taken away. The farmers worked under the sun until their hand cracked, yet they never saw the reward. Their children wore torn clothes, their villages sank deeper into poverty, while somewhere across the sea, fortunes were made in their name. Traoré had listened to these whispers since his youth. Old men spoke in quiet voices, women carried anger in their eyes, young men left their homes because there was no future left for them. The land gave, but the people never received. Tonight, when he looked at those trucks, he knew this was a proof. This was a theft caught red-handed. But stopping it meant standing against powers far beyond the border. Still, he did not move back. The soldiers with him waited, their breaths tight in their chests. They were not facing ordinary smugglers. They were facing a system, a chain that stretched from the soil of their villages all the way to polished offices in European capitals. Traoré stepped forward. He demanded the back doors of the first truck be opened. The driver resisted, his eyes nervous, his hands shaking. But under the glare of armed men, the metal doors slowly pulled apart. What spilled into view stunned everyone. Mountains of cotton, packed and compressed, enough to fill warehouses, enough to clothe millions. The soldiers exchanged looks, but it was Traoré who held his gaze steady. This was not just cotton. This was stolen life. This was the blood of farmers hidden in plain sight, wrapped in silence, and now standing before them as undeniable proof. But the question hung heavy in the air. If this much cotton was caught tonight, how many convoys had already crossed unchecked? How many lives had been robbed in the shadows? The drivers refused to speak. The papers they carried were forged with false seals. Yet the trail was clear. The destination was far away, across the sea, where wealth spoke louder than justice. The night grew colder, but the fire inside Traoré only grew hotter. He had captured one convoy, but he knew he had just touched the surface of something far darker. And what came next, no one was ready to face. The soldiers stood frozen around the convoy, as if the very ground beneath them had shifted. For a moment, no one spoke. The mountain of cotton stared back at them like a silent witness, exposing a crime too large to hide. Ibrahim Traoré did not raise his voice, yet the weight in his silence pressed harder than any command. He knew that this discovery was not the end of the journey. It was only the beginning of a storm. Subscribe now, because what unfolds from this night will challenge everything you thought you knew about power, greed, and betrayal. The drivers avoided his eyes. They feared something more than the soldiers. They feared the ones who sent them. Traoré sensed it. He stepped closer to one of the men, his boots echoing against the dirt road. "Who gave you this order?" he asked. The man shook his head. His lips trembled, but no sound came out. Another soldier grabbed the forged papers from his pocket. The seals were marked with symbols of authority, the kind that could only be forged by those inside the system. That was the first twist. It was not just smugglers. It was officials, men who held office by day and trafficked wealth by night. The soldiers looked at each other, unease growing in their eyes. They had pledged loyalty to their land, but many had also been taught to obey voices from above. If the names behind this operation were truly those in power, then exposing them would mean tearing down walls that had stood for decades. Traoré knew the danger, yet his face carried no hesitation. He was not fighting for himself. He was carrying the cries of farmers who had been robbed of their dignity for generations. He ordered every truck to be opened. One by one, the doors swung wide, and each revealed the same truth. Cotton stacked high, packed with precision, marked for shipment. The papers listed false destinations, but hidden codes traced a journey across borders, leading straight to European factories. For a moment, the soldiers felt the enormity of it all. Their nation's lifeblood had been reduced to a silent trade route. enriching distant lands while leaving their own people in hunger. Whispers spread among the soldiers. One asked quietly, "If we stop them, will the world not turn against us?" Another said, "If we let them go, then we are no better than the thieves." Traoré listened, his hand resting on the cold steel of the truck. He knew their fear. He knew the cost of resistance. But he also knew that silence was a weapon their oppressors had always used. He looked back at his men and spoke with measured strength. "Tonight we choose whether we are gods of our people or shadows of those who steal from them." His words cut through the night. The men straightened, their hesitation turning into fire. They realized this was more than cotton. This was a battle over the very soul of their land. But deep within the darkness, unseen eyes were already watching. The empire that owned these trucks would not forgive such defiance, and the retaliation was already on its way. The night air carried a strange stillness, the kind that follows a storm before it breaks. The trucks stood like silent beasts, their secrets spilled into the open, while Ibrahim Traore kept his eyes on the horizon. He knew that this confrontation would not end here. The cotton was only the surface, but beneath it lay something far more dangerous. Before I reveal what he discovered next, take a moment to subscribe, because the journey you are following is a truth that others tried to bury in silence. The drivers were separated, their faces pale under the harsh lantern light. One of them finally broke. His voice shook as he confessed that this convoy was not the first, nor the largest. Dozens had already crossed the border, protected by signatures from officials and guards who were paid to look away. The soldier holding him trembled with anger. "How long had they been stealing?" he demanded. The driver lowered his head. "For as long as I have been alive," he whispered. That single answer weighed heavier than the cotton itself. It meant the theft was not a single act. It was a cycle, older than most of them, running like a machine that never stopped. It meant generations had been robbed quietly, and no one dared to speak. Traoré felt the words burn inside him. He thought of farmers bent over fields, children waiting for a future that never arrived, villages sinking into poverty while convoys like this rolled away their wealth. He ordered the drivers to be taken aside. But as his men carried them away, one soldier noticed something unusual inside the last truck. Beneath the cotton, buried under layers of cloth, lay sealed wooden crates. Traoré stepped forward, his voice firm. "Open them." The locks were broken, the lids pried open, and inside were documents, maps, and records. Each file carried lists of shipments, coded routes, and names. The truth lay exposed in ink and paper. The cotton was only a cover. The real trade was larger, reaching deep into networks that spread beyond their land. The soldiers gasped as they read the names. These were not distant strangers. Some were men who attended official ceremonies, men who stood smiling beside leaders, men who shook hands with diplomats. The betrayal was inside their own walls. For every farmer sweating under the sun, there was an official sipping wealth in secret. Traoré kept turning the pages, his jaw clenched tighter with every revelation. The network was vast. The profits did not only line European factories, but also filled the pockets of men at home, men who were supposed to protect their people. That was a twist no one wanted to face. It was not just foreign greed. It was betrayal from within. The soldiers watched him in silence, waiting for his command. Traoré looked at the files, then at the cotton stacked like stolen dreams. He knew this night was no longer about trucks or convoys. It was about tearing away a mask that had covered the faces of traitors for far too long. But far away, in polished halls of power, the news of this interception had already reached ears that were not willing to lose. Plans were already unfolding, and shadows were preparing to strike back. The night carried the weight of betrayal, and the files in Traoré's hands felt heavier than the cotton stacked in those trucks. Every page revealed names of men who had sworn loyalty to the nation, yet their signatures were tied to stolen wealth. The soldiers whispered among themselves, their voices low, their eyes filled with disbelief. They had always suspected corruption, but seeing it carved in ink was a wound that cut too deep. Before I reveal what happened next, subscribe now, because the truth you are hearing is a kind that powerful men would rather keep locked away. Traoré closed the file slowly. His silence unsettled everyone, but his thoughts were racing. He understood that exposing these names would set fire to the ground he stood on. The system would not bend, it would fight back. Those who controlled the routes, the the signatures, and the money had built fortresses around themselves. They had soldiers, politicians, even international allies who benefited from their silence. To strike against them meant walking directly into a storm. But to let it continue meant betraying the farmers, the mothers, the children, and every man who believed in justice. As he stood there, one of his men ran forward, breathing heavily. "Captain," he said with urgency, "we have spotted vehicles approaching from the east." The words tightened the air like a rope around their necks. Traoré turned his gaze toward the horizon. Faint lights flickered in the distance, growing closer with every passing moment. This was no coincidence. The convoy had been missed, and someone powerful had sent reinforcements. The soldiers around him shifted nervously. Some gripped their rifles tighter, others whispered fears of retaliation. What if they come with orders from the government itself? One asked. The fear was real, because if the men arriving carried official banners, then pulling the trigger would mean treason in the eyes of the state. But Traoré's voice cut through the fear. "Do not forget," he said, "the law is not written by thieves. The truth is standing before us. We cannot unsee it." The vehicles drew closer, the engines rumbling louder. Headlights pierced the dark, throwing sharp beams across the dusty road. The soldiers prepared, every heartbeat heavy with uncertainty. When the first jeep halted, men stepped out, armed and dressed in the uniform of authority. Their faces carried arrogance, as if they already owned the night. The leader among them smirked. "You have made a mistake," he declared. "Release the trucks and walk away before this becomes something you cannot control." The soldiers turned to Traoré, waiting for his command. He did not move, his eyes locked on the man who had spoken. Then he raised a file in his hand and let the papers flutter in the wind. "The mistake," he replied firmly, "is believing that fear will silence us." His words struck like a blade. The opposing commander's smile faded. His men tightened their grips on their weapons. The road was no longer just a road. It had become a battlefield of truth versus betrayal, and one spark had set it all ablaze. The dust settled between the two sides, and for a brief moment, the silence felt heavier than the guns aimed across the road. Ibrahim Traoré stood in the center, his shadow stretched by the headlights of the approaching vehicles. The soldiers behind him breathed hard, their fingers tense on their weapons, but none moved without his word. The men opposite him waited with smug confidence, believing authority was enough to command surrender. But what they had not expected was that the files in Traoré's hand carried proof of their betrayal. Before I reveal the turn this confrontation took, make sure to subscribe, because what comes next shows why this night became a fire no one could put out. The commander of the opposing force stepped forward, his boots sinking into the date. His voice carried the arrogance of someone backed by powerful names. "You are outnumbered. These trucks belong to the state. If you resist, you will be treated as traitors." The word traitors cut through the night like a blade. Some of Traoré's men flinched. They knew that if the story was twisted, history would record them as criminals instead of guardians. That was the weapon the enemy relied on, the power to control not only guns, but also narratives. Traoré did not lower his gaze. He raised the file again and spoke with calm precision. "You say the trucks belong to the state, yet the papers inside them carry false seals. You call us traitors, yet the true betrayal lies in these signatures that sold the people's wealth to foreign masters." His words spread like fire among his men, igniting their fear into anger. They remembered the hunger in their homes, the despair in their villages, the endless lies told by those in power. And now, the truth stood naked before them. The opposing commander's face hardened. "You do not understand the forces you are standing against," he warned. "This cotton feeds more than factories. It feeds alliances. It feeds governments. You think you can stop it? You think you can face what comes next?" His words dripped with threat, but his eyes carried something else, unease, because even he knew that truth had a power bullets could not silence. Then came the moment no one expected. One of Traoré's soldiers, a young man who had been silent all night, stepped forward. His voice shook, but his words carried conviction. "If we let them take this again, then we are already dead men." His courage spread like a wave, and soon others echoed, gripping their rifles not with fear, but with determination. They were no longer just following orders. They were claiming ownership of their nation's dignity. The tension exploded when one of the enemy soldiers tried to push past the trucks. Traoré raised his hand, and his men blocked the way. The two forces stood nose to nose, every breath a trigger waiting to be pulled. The opposing commander clenched his jaw, realizing that intimidation had failed. This was no longer a simple interception. This was defiance against an empire. And in that fragile space of silence, the first spark was about to ignite. The road had become a line of fire, invisible yet burning through every heart that stood upon it. Ibrahim Traoré's men faced the opposing soldiers with steady hands, but their eyes carried more than defiance. They carried the memory of their mothers working in fields, of fathers bent with exhaustion, of children waiting for food that never arrived. The enemy stood tall, backed by power, money, and the arrogance of those who believed Africa was theirs to plunder. And between them all, Traoré stood unmoved, his presence heavy with the weight of a nation. Before I take you through how this night ended, subscribe now, because what you are about to hear is the kind of truth that history books never dare to print. The first spark came not from a bullet, but from a voice. The young soldier who had spoken earlier shouted again, this time louder, his words shaking the air. We are not slaves. The shout echoed through the night like thunder. His voice cracked, but it carried the power of 1,000 silent throats. The enemy's soldiers shifted uneasily, their arrogance bruised by the sound of conviction they could not erase. The opposing commander raised his hand, prepared to order force, but Traoré stepped forward before he could speak. His voice was calm, yet it cut sharper than any command. If you fire tonight, you will not only kill us, you will kill the last hope of your own people. You will kill the truth standing in front of you. Ask yourself, who benefit from this convoy? Is it you? Or is it the masters across the sea who will never remember your name? His words struck not only the commander, but also the soldiers behind him. For the first time, cracks appeared in their stance. Some lowered their rifles, doubt pressing heavy on their shoulders. The commander's face twisted in anger. He barked at his men to stand firm, but hesitation had already poisoned their resolve. One soldier looked at the cotton, then at the documents spilling from the crates. His whisper carried through the silence. He is right. We guard thieves. That whisper was a dagger. It spread like a current, and suddenly the line between authority and rebellion blurred. Traoré seized the moment. He raised his voice, not with rage, but with unshakable certainty. This cotton will not leave our land tonight. Not one thread, not one crate. If you want to take it, then you will have to walk through us. And if you choose that, then remember, history will carve your names not as soldiers, but as traitors. His words carried a force bullets could never match. The opposing commander realized he was losing control. His men were no longer united. The air thickened with uncertainty. Finally, with clenched teeth, he ordered a retreat. Engines roared, headlights turned, and the vehicles vanished into the dark, leaving the convoy in Traoré's hands. The silence that followed was not peace. It was the sound of a war just beginning. For tonight, Traoré had won, but he knew the empire he defied would not sleep. It would return, stronger, angrier, and hungrier. Yet one truth could not be erased. A line had been drawn, and the people had chosen to stand. And from this night onward, the fight for dignity would never again be silent.